All right, welcome, bienvenidos, bienvenidas, welcome everybody to School of Communication. As you know, the School of Communication and the Center for Computational Science here at UM are also sponsors of this workshop, and we're really happy to have you here. I am Alberto Cairo, and I teach infographics and visualization here at the University of Miami, and today I am going to talk a little bit about actually, I renamed my talk yesterday. I was planning to call my talk Introduction to Visualization and Infographics, which didn't sound a lot of fun. I decided to rename my talk as It's More Complicated Than That. Okay? This is going to be the title of my talk. Infographics and visualizations that oversimplify or obfuscate data, or how clear data should be. And I believe when I actually was getting ready for the presentation, I decided that it would be a good idea to explain where this presentation comes from, and also where the title of this presentation comes from, because it is essential to understanding, I believe, what you're trying to do these days with all the data that you're gathering and that you're trying to present to readers, general audiences in general. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origins of this presentation. The origins of this presentation are in a conversation that Mariana and I had a while ago, like a year ago, something like that. She told me, can you give a talk here at, Chicas Poderosas? We are going to organize Chicas Poderosas here in Miami. Can you give a talk? And I said, sure, I can give a talk. It's not a problem with that. What I should talk about? Obviously, I should talk about visualization and about infographics, obviously. But what about? She told me basically, you can choose whatever topic you want. And I said, all right, consider it done. That's great. I can do that. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, what I should talk about. Because just an introduction to infographics and visualization will be extremely boring. If you're interested in learning about the basics of visualization, transforming data into graphics, maps, charts, etc., that explain things to readers, you can go online. Okay, yeah, there's plenty of information out there. So in the back of my mind, I was basically thinking, crap, what am I going to talk about? I didn't say that, obviously. I'm thinking, okay, I was thinking there, but no, I didn't say that. So at first I thought, well, I could perhaps talk a little bit about technology, right? I could talk about programming languages. I could talk about tools that are showing up recently in the world of visualization. I could mention Plotly and Graphly and Lyra and Tableau Public and Python and R and all the tools that are showing up and that we can use today, open source tools and free tools that make our lives much easier. All right, so I could talk about those tools, but there's a lot of people out there, I believe, that are already talking about how wonderful these tools can be. So then I decided, well, perhaps I could talk a little bit about what tools to choose, because today there are so many of them that one of the challenges that we face, that I face, and that my students face is what should I be focusing on? What tools should I be learning? So I said, well, I don't know. Let's think about that. Perhaps I could talk about between the, so to speak, rivalry between Python and R, for instance, for data analysis and for data visualization. And we designers who love to talk about these kinds of rivalries, if you're old enough, and I'm old enough to remember that, you may remember that the fight between Python and R, it basically mimics the fight between Adobe Illustrator and freehand many years ago. I remember these discussions back in the 90s. Oh, freehand is better, Illustrator is better. There was a lot of conversation about that. Obviously, everybody knows that Illustrator is better than freehand, but I don't want to get into that. We could also talk about, this also mimics the fight between PCs and Macs. Everybody talks about that in design. I don't have a preference really. And all these, I was actually thinking about all this when I was preparing for the presentation. And my mind was wandering around, right, thinking about all these rivalries and all these kind of things. And actually, all these conversations in my mind mimic stupid films like those ones that you have on screen, Boat versus Python and Mega Shark versus Giant, whatever. So those fights or those conversations make probably as much sense as all those films, right? So, well, this is not going anywhere. This was not going anywhere when I was preparing for this presentation. So I really needed to think about what to talk about. And here's what I do when I have to prepare for a presentation. I cannot make a presentation, I cannot prepare for a presentation if I am distracted. And probably some of you know that I use Twitter a lot, that I'm in social media a lot, so I get distracted constantly. So every time that I have to prepare for a presentation or that I have to write a blog post for my blog or a book, I'm actually writing another book right now, every time that I have to do that, I need to isolate myself. Some people like to isolate themselves going, for a walk in the woods or, going to, to the swamps here in Miami. We have plenty of those. Just be surrounded by trees. But the problem is that I have allergies, okay? And I cannot go to trees. So whenever I need to isolate myself, I also like, being surrounded by trees. It's only that I need to go to a place in which trees have been devoided of their allergenic components. So I go to bookstores, okay? Which is also a place, there are also places that are, in which you can be surrounded by trees, although they come in a different format, in different form. So I went to Barnes & Noble. All right, this actually happened last week because I was preparing 2 different presentations last week, and I went to Barnes & Noble. And I randomly, every time that I go to Barnes & Noble, I randomly choose books and I gather them and I put them on the table. That's the stack of books that I got last week when I went to Barnes & Noble to prepare for this presentation. I got a lot of different, very interesting books. The most interesting one, and the one that I ended up buying, is the one that you have on top, which is this one, Reinventing American Healthcare, which is a book that I'm currently reading. It's a quite interesting book. The book really got my eye because it actually explains why Obamacare is so necessary in this country. And it does that through an argument, all right? It makes the case for Obamacare. Also makes the case for, it makes the case for the public coverage, for public health care. And it does that through information graphics and through visualization. If you open the book randomly, you will see that the book is full of excellent visualizations. For instance, this one, which is basically a scatter plot that shows you basically the relationship between GDP and expenditures or expenses in healthcare per person in each one of those countries. And as you can see, there's a very clear correlation between economic development and expenses in GDP, with a couple of exceptions, very clear ones. One of them is Luxembourg, in which GDP per capita is really high, but expenses in healthcare are relatively low, and the other one is the USA, in which the GDP is relatively small, but expenses in healthcare are huge. The book also makes the case for public healthcare, or for public support for healthcare, including diagrams that explain how simple it is to navigate the current system here in the United States. These are all the components of the current healthcare system here in the United States. And as you can see, it's not simple at all, right? It's extremely complicated. At the same time, when I was reading this book actually told me a lot about what this talk could be about, okay? What I wanted to tell you or to talk about during this talk. Because the case that this book makes is not made only through the visualizations. If you take a look at the book, you will see that it's an extremely thick book. So all those graphics, all those visualizations that you see inside that book are surrounded by copy, are surrounded by text, are surrounded by context. And that is the key thing. I believe that in many cases, when we do visualizations and when we do infographics, we forget about the context of the data that we are presenting. And that is what I would like to warn you against, because you're working on visualizations nowadays. So I'm going to give you some recommendations on how I believe that you can make a better work over this weekend when you work on these projects. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 different recommendations. Recommendation number 1. Stories are always more complicated than they seem at first, okay? Don't try to oversimplify data or oversimplify stories. I'm going to give you a few examples of what I mean by this. One of them is extremely recent. It's very recent. It was published by Vox.com. If you're not familiar with Vox.com, probably you are familiar with Ezra Klein, who used to work for the Washington Post. And then he left the Washington Post and he created this online publication called Vox.com, which is intended to explain complex issues to general readers. All right, it's an excellent publication. But sometimes they oversimplify or they rush to conclusions. And this is a perfect example of what I mean. A couple of days ago, they published a stack of infographics or visualizations, a group of visualizations intended to show why the current system, why the current system in the United States is so expensive, or how outrageously expensive current healthcare here in the United States is. And they do that through different charts, different diagrams, comparisons of prices in different countries, etc., etc., etc. I read that, and as a journalist, I tend to be very skeptical with data. Every time that I see a story that is based on data, if I can do that, if I have the time, I go to the original sources, okay? I tend not to trust journalists. That is something that I recommend that you do as well. So I went to their source, okay? Their main source is this organization over here. I cannot really read that. I don't remember the name of the organization, but you can read it. I'm not seeing the screen. Anyway, I went to their source, and I saw the report that Vox.com used to create those infographics. And as you can see, it says it's the International Federation of Health Plans. And in that report, you can see that they say very interesting things about the data. They say, for instance, that prices for each country are submitted by participating federation member plans. And the most important thing is how they gather the data for the United States and how they gather the data for other countries. For the United States, prices were calculated from a database with over 100 million claims that reflect prices negotiated and paid between thousands of providers and almost 100 commercial health plans. Excellent. That's a huge sample. Perfect. But then when you go to the data collected for other countries, they say prices for Australia, Argentina, and Spain are from the private sector with data provided by one private health plan in each one of those countries. Not representative. You cannot compare orange and pears or orange and apples. This is what they are doing, right? And the journalists who created this story didn't pay enough attention at this fact that the data are not really comparable, because you are comparing a huge data set with just one provider for each one of those countries. The other thing that they didn't pay attention at is that the circumstances of each one of those countries also affect those prices. If you already have a public healthcare provider in a country, that brings prices down. Because if you need to compete with a public healthcare provider, you cannot outrageously increase your prices. You will have a huge competitor that will tend to lower prices in that country. That needs to be taken into consideration. Actually, they say that. The original source says that. It says comparisons across different countries are complicated. Yeah, they are. By differences in sectors, fee schedules, and systems. Why isn't that shown in the story that Vox.com published? We need to show that, because these factors or these variables are incredibly important to understanding what the information means. If you get rid of that when you create your story, you're basically creating a story that is not complete. You're not telling the entire story. And that is crucial for understanding the data. Also, when Vox.com created the graphics, they made an outrageous mistake. Take a look at one of the graphics that they did. Okay, this graphic shows how much it costs to spend a day in a hospital in the United States, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, and Spain. And the headline for that graphic is, a day in a hospital costs $4,000 here and $700 in Argentina. I said, sure, but salaries in the United States are much higher than salaries in Argentina. So those things are not comparable. So I went online, I gathered data of income, wages, GDP per capita, etc., and I remade these graphics, which is something that I believe that the journalists from Vox.com should have done. You have a question? Go ahead.
No, I think in Argentina we have 2 rates for dollar.
That's another thing. In Argentina, you have 2 rates for dollar. Another factor that we need to consider.
What about the level of coverage?
What about, all those things that you're saying are the things that should be shown in the graphic. That needs to be shown in the story. You have to see the context of the data. You need to see what surrounds those variables that you're trying to present. It is not enough to say, it costs that much here and it costs that much there. Because you are just showing one variable. Any variable or any number on its own means nothing. It only starts meaning something when you show the context of that data, of that number, or of that variable that you're trying to present. I didn't consider that for my own redesign of these graphics, all those factors that you are mentioning. What I did was to just get data from GDP per capita and basically create the derived variable or the control variable. I basically divided the price of each one of those procedures by the GDP per capita of each one of those countries to calculate the percent of your income that costs to spend one day in a hospital. And see what I got. Compare this bar graph that Vox.com created with this bar graph that I ended up with. Actually, New Zealand is more expensive than the United States for some reason. This is closer to the truth. This is untrue. It's not a lie, because they were not trying to lie, but it is untrue. And we should avoid untrue stories. The first principle in visualization, I'm going to show you a quote that I love, okay? It's a quote that is not related to visualization per se or to journalism per se. It's related to science, but I believe that it's applicable to journalism directly. It's a quote taken by a talk by Richard Feynman, a very famous scientist, who, talking about science, said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." All right? We need to remember this sentence. For one reason, we tend to jump to conclusions, okay? We humans, in general, tend to jump to conclusions. We see a data set and we say, hey, I see the truth in this data, and you only present that. You have to force yourself to stop and navigate the data, trying to put the data in context, okay? That fact that we tend to jump to conclusions when we see data, there is a precise term to define that thing. It's a term that I love to use in my talks. It's called patternicity. We tend to see patterns in data. Even if we don't want to, our brain tends to see patterns in data. Patternicity basically means seeing meaningful patterns in meaningless noise or in meaningless data. Those are two famous books that talk about patternicity. And I believe that they should be required readings for journalists and designers. Both of them. The second one is extremely famous, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is basically a book about cognitive biases, how our brain deceives us or lies to us somehow. But the other one is also extremely important, The Believing Brain, by Michael Shermer, who is the director of the Skeptic magazine. Both of them are incredibly important. Let me show you an example of patternicity that happened to me, all right? Seeing patterns, okay? Seeing patterns that deceive me somehow. Every year, I go to Ukraine to teach a workshop about visualization and infographics. Obviously, everybody's reading about Ukraine these days. I didn't go to Ukraine this year for obvious reasons. But I went to Ukraine between 2004 and 2012. Last time that I went there to teach a workshop, remember that this was before the protests and the revolution in Ukraine started, okay? Nobody here in the US had ever heard about Ukraine, right? So I went to Ukraine last year in 2012, and I met with the people who do visualization and data journalism for a news organization called Texty. And I'm going to show you their URL. By the way, all these slides are going to be available for you after the presentation. I'm going to put them online so you can visit every single example that I'm showing. All right, these people are Texty. Texty is an independent news organization, right? And they have a small data visualization and data journalism team. It's just two people, a journalist and a designer. They're extremely talented people. And they showed me the visualizations that they create, and I thought that they were amazing. Their quality is just unbelievably good. All right, they were extraordinary. One of them actually caught my eye much more than the others. And you have to remember first that I saw the following visualization before the protests began, before anybody else in the US had ever heard about Ukraine. Right? So it's a graphic that shows electoral results, parliamentary election results in Ukraine. You're just going to see a map with two different colors, blue and orange. Blue represents the areas in which the party that is pro-Western won, okay? And orange represents the regions in which the pro-Russian party, sorry, it's actually the opposite. Orange represents the pro-Western party, and blue represents the pro-Russian party. And then the size of the bubbles that you're going to see are proportional to the difference of votes in each one of those countries. When I saw that map, even if I don't speak of a word of Ukrainian, I was amazed, because it shows you a very clear picture of what's going on in Ukraine. The western part of the country voted majoritarily for the pro-Western party, and the eastern and southern part of the country voted majoritarily for the pro-Russian party, the party of the former president, or the president who was expelled a few months ago. It's an amazing, amazing visualization. The most amazing thing, by the way, is that this thing was created by just two people. All right, just two people. It's really incredible. But it is also misleading. And I'm going to show you why it's misleading. They didn't obviously did this in purpose. That was just my mistake, okay? It misled me just because of my cognitive biases. When the protests in Ukraine began, I had this map in mind. Before any other news organization here in the US published this map, I had this map in mind. And I started seeing maps published all over the place. The BBC, for instance, published this map showing where the first protests a few months ago began. Okay, and as you can see, there is a clear, they actually overlap. If you put those maps side by side, you will see that protests in Ukraine began exactly in this region over here, which is the pro-Western part of the country. And when I saw those two maps and I put them side by side, I actually shot an email to the people at Texty. I told them, hey guys, take a look at this. Your map explains everything. It explains everything. It's so clear. And I said, yeah, it's very clear. It's too clear. Because the picture or the current political situation in Ukraine is not as clear-cut as this map is presenting, or as news organizations in the US are presenting. The picture is much more nuanced or much more complex than it seems at first. And actually, US organizations such as the Washington Post were publishing maps that resemble basically that map over there. They were presenting an extremely clear divide between pro-Western and pro-Russian. Extremely clear. Everybody here in the US has heard this story. And this story is basically true as a headline. But after the headline, you have to show me the complexity of the data, the nuances in the data. And there is actually plenty of nuances in that data. When I send them these maps to the people at Texty, they email me back the results of several polls, okay? Several polls in which the pollsters had asked people in different regions in Ukraine if they wanted to join the European Union or if they were in favor of joining the Russian Union, okay, strengthening the ties with Russia. And as you can see, the western part of the country is majoritarily in favor of joining the European Union, and only a few people are in favor of joining Russia. But then if you go to the south and the west, the most pro-Russian regions in the country, the picture is not that clear. If you go to the most Russian part of the country, the eastern part of the country, you will see that only 50% of people are in favor of joining Russia. The point that I'm trying to make over here is that if you stick to this map, we are oversimplifying. We are just showing the headline of the story. It is only when we present both things, when we present a much deeper picture, a much more complex and nuanced picture to our readers, one variable is related to the other variable. And I believe that we see many infographics today and many visualizations today that oversimplify. For instance, this one that I picked at random from my collection of infographics of horrors. I have a collection of horrors of infographics in my computer. This is just one of them. And we see these kinds of things all the time, right? 33% of people use Twitter, 45% of people use Facebook. And how has that number changed throughout the years? Compared to what? Compared to whom? Compared to when? That is what you have to think about when you are creating a visualization. Compared to, okay? Seeing the variables that connect to the variable that you are presenting and see what the different interactions between those variables are. If you just present me with a number, you're telling me anything. This is the equivalent of writing a headline without writing the story afterwards. You will never write just a headline. You write the headline and then you provide context. You provide the background information that explains that headline. You provide the nuances in the data. You show the complexity of the data. You try to be true to the complexity of those data. We should avoid these kinds of things. Actually, I would like to refer to a historical example to explain another thing that we journalists do all the time when we jump to conclusions, okay? Actually, today I'm not wearing a t-shirt, I am wearing a statement, okay? This is a statement, okay? Because this basically represents this map that you have over here, which is my favorite information graphic ever, okay? But before we focus on it, I'm going to explain why I believe that this map is extremely important to what we do. It is extremely important for this reason. We journalists, in general, the way we create stories is we first come up with a hypothesis. We want to explain that there is a connection between political divide and what is going on in Ukraine. And then we look for the data that confirms that hypothesis, only that. We don't pay attention at what could potentially disprove or refute the story that we have in mind. That is not what scientists do. What scientists do is to look for data that confirms the hypothesis and also surrounding data or context data that could potentially refute what we have in mind. So if you have ever worked like that, first of all, come up with the headline and then look for the data to support the headline, change your mind. That is not how we should be working. Forget about the headline for a minute. Explore the data first. Now, how many of you are familiar with this map? Just a few of you, half of you. All right. This map was done in the 19th century by a doctor called Jon Snow. I'm not going to go into the details. This is Jon Snow with an H. It's not Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, okay? Yeah, you know nothing, Jon Snow. Well, this guy knew a lot, okay? So this is the thing. Like, this is just part of the nerdy part of the talk. Anyway, so Jon Snow. Jon Snow was a physician in London in the 19th century who tried to find or tried to explore what was causing cholera in London. You know that cholera killed a lot of people in London in the 19th century, all right? And we know today, because we have all these technological and scientific means to explore the causes of cholera, we know today that cholera is caused by drinking contaminated water, okay? We drink water that has been contaminated by a bacteria, we get cholera, and we die of diarrhea. And the diarrhea actually, our fecal matter can potentially contaminate the sources of water that other people use. That's cholera. That's how cholera is transmitted. We know that today, but in the 19th century they didn't know that, okay? They actually thought that cholera was transmitted by breathing contaminated air. And they didn't believe that for a very simple and very straightforward and actually very smart reason. Many doctors had observed that the places in which you had more cases of cholera were usually the places that stank, that, you know, where smells were worse. They actually had established a correlational relationship between the two variables. The worse a place smells, the more cases of cholera. That's a correlational relationship between two variables. It's perfectly scientific. But at the same time, we all know that correlation doesn't mean causation. It may be that there is a variable that we don't know about that is causing both the bad smells and also the cases of cholera. And actually there were people like Jon Snow who were convinced that cholera could not be provoked or transmitted by air. It should be transmitted by something else. And he proposed the hypothesis. It's water, okay? It's contaminated water that is causing this. But how do you prove that? Or how do you show the evidence of your idea if you don't have microscopes, if you don't have all the scientific means that we have today? He did that with a map. This map here represents the deaths during an outbreak of cholera in the center of London. And as you can see, what you see over here is a ton of bars, okay? You see a lot of black bars everywhere. Those are actually not really bars. They are stackings of little lines, okay? So these things that you have over here are a bunch of lines stacked on top of each other, and that creates the bar. That's number of deaths. One death, another death, another death, another death. And when you notice that, you will see that there is an extremely clear pattern of concentration, and very extremely clear pattern of clustering around the center of the map. The closer you get to the center of the map, the higher the number of deaths, okay? And actually, if you go to the epicenter of the cholera outbreak, you will see that there is a water pump there in the middle. The closer you get to that water pump, the higher the number of cases of cholera, the number of deaths of cholera, right? So it's extremely clear. It is actually too clear. This pattern of concentration proves the hypothesis. But there are also some things over here that could potentially refute that hypothesis. What are those things? Well, there's people over here who also died of cholera, but they still live very far from the water well, from the water pump. Why did they die? All right, this potentially could disprove, could refute the hypothesis. And there are several buildings over here in the center, very close to the water pump, in which no deaths were recorded. Okay, that could also potentially refute your hypothesis. So Jon Snow did something that we journalists should do more, which is to pay attention to those exceptions, to those outliers. That is the thing. He went to those places and he discovered that those people that died, even if they live far from the water well over here, those were people that every day on their way to work or on their way to school passed by this street every single day. And this happened in August, September, so it was warm, all right? So those people stopped every day here in the Broad Street water pump to get some water to drink. That's why they died. That's why they got cholera, all right? And also, he also paid attention to the buildings here in which no deaths were recorded. Why? Well, he went to this place, for instance, and he discovered that that place was a brewery. The people who worked there didn't drink water. They drank spirits. That is the thing, the spirits that they produced. And they also, and this is the most important factor, they also had a private well inside the building. So they didn't drink the public water. They drank from the private well. That is the reason why nobody died in that building. Pay attention to exceptions. Always pay attention to the context of the data. Variables that could affect the story that you're trying to tell. That is the first recommendation. Second recommendation, don't obfuscate. Don't try to create something that is overly complex. This is the mirror of what I said before, okay? The mirror image of what I said before. Don't oversimplify, but don't overcomplicate. And don't try to be extremely creative, all right? I am completely in favor of being creative with visualization, but we should be careful with creativity, and we should be a little bit skeptical with creativity as well. I'm going to show you work by a lot of people whom I admire. I have to say this beforehand because I'm going to criticize them, okay? I admire them a lot, okay? But I do believe that sometimes they go a little bit beyond what is acceptable, right? First people that I would like to, not acceptable, that is not the right word, but, appropriate perhaps. The first people who I would like to talk about is Accurate. If you have never heard of Accurate, go online, search for Accurate, accurate.it, I believe that is their website. They produce tons of beautiful and wonderful data visualizations. But some of them are extremely complicated and very difficult to read, okay? Some of them, not all of them, but only some of them. I'm going to show you perhaps one of them that is an extreme example of what I mean. This one over here, called brain drain, which basically shows the percentage, or is intended to show, the percentage of researchers on each one of those countries who are foreigners compared to the percentage of people who do something else, compared to the percentage of women who have in the workforce, compared to the number of people, compared to the GDP, compared to the, I completely got lost. I didn't understand a thing over there. Take a look at the key, at the number of variables that are represented in there. Female unemployment, number of countries, GDP, unemployment rate, foreign researchers, foreign people, immigrant population, immigrant researchers returning to country of origin percentage. I am exhausted as a reader. If I am exhausted as a reader, a general reader will be more exhausted because I am someone who reads visualizations every single day. If I cannot interpret this visualization correctly, someone who knows about stats, about numbers, about data journalism, about visualization, try to think about an average reader. They will not understand it. They will not know where to begin to read the visualization. That is what I think about these overly complex visualizations. When you try to be overly creative, you are not guiding me through the process of understanding the information. It is not that we should not show the complexity of the data. It is not that. We need to show all the data, but we need to do it perhaps in a different way. And also, perhaps the data form, the graphic form that has been used to represent the data should be a little bit less complicated than it is right now. They did it probably for aesthetics reasons, and aesthetics are extremely dangerous in data visualization. It is not that we should not create visualizations that are beautiful. I'm not saying that. Our visualizations need to be beautiful, but they need to be functional first. We need to think about how readers are going to approach the data. So you need to think about the structures, what you are trying to present. Now, at the same time, let me give you a little bit of a warning over here. And again, at the same time, I'm not saying that we should not try to innovate. We need to innovate and create new graphic forms and explore and experiment. If we don't do that, we will not be creating new graphic forms to explore data. Actually, if we think about history again, I don't know if you are aware of that, but today we take statistical graphics for granted, but actually statistical graphics were created by a person. William Playfair at the end of the 18th century, all right? In a couple of books. You can read about William Playfair in an excellent Wikipedia article, all right? Actually, many journalists believe that Wikipedia is not a reliable source, but it is, particularly in these kind of cases, okay? The article about William Playfair is excellent. This guy basically invented, quotation marks, the statistical charts, because before William Playfair, economists and political scientists used to present data just in tabular form, tons of numbers, rows and columns, all right? But suddenly he realized, well, let's try to represent our data as if we are creating a map. On a map, you know that you have two different variables. You have longitude and latitude to represent the position of any point. He said, well, what about if we use also a set of Cartesian coordinates over here, and instead of representing longitude and latitude, we change those variables and we use quantitative variables instead. We will end up with something that let us see patterns and trends in the data. He innovated. He created something new, and it worked. So we should experiment, but we should also be skeptical with experimentation, okay? I usually joke, by the way, journalists, not you, but journalists working in newsrooms are one of the most conservative species in the world, and every time that you try to do something new, they usually say, hey, our reader is not going to understand this, right? They usually say that, okay? That is not necessarily true. I usually joke that if William Playfair were, a news designer today, he would never have invented statistical charts, okay? It's because he will go to his editor and say, hey, I'm creating this beautiful thing, and the editor will say, hey, our reader will not understand this very complex thing, all right? That's a very common reaction in newsrooms. But at the same time, we should not go too far, in my opinion. We should be careful with what we do, or at least we should give readers the option of seeing the data in a very innovative way and in a more conservative way. You can combine the two approaches in your visualizations. Let me show you an example of what I mean. This is a graphic created by the Washington Post very recently. It's called Are the Winter Olympics for the Rich? And it is trying to show, you will see that it's a fun graphic with tons of bubbles moving around. I love those. You click on next and they cluster in a different way. And then you click on next and they group in a different way. The goal of the graphic is to show you that the richer a country is, the more likely that country is to win medals in the Olympics, okay? If you pay attention at the graphic, you will see that certain countries are showing a black dot in the middle. Those are the countries that won some medals. Now, can you quickly estimate the proportions in there? The percent of rich countries that won medals, the percent? You cannot. You cannot do that. And that is a very basic task that a reader may want to accomplish. That's what I tried to do. When I saw the graphic, first of all, I was captured. I was, seduced by how beautiful the visualization was, because it's so fun with all the circles around, etc. But then at the end, the graphic fails to deliver. It fails to transform itself into a tool that I can use to extract meaning
from the data. I cannot extract meaning from the data. I just see a lot of circles bouncing around. So what about if after you do the fun part of the graphic, all the circles moving around and stuff, you let readers visualize the information in a much more traditional way. The next thing that I'm going to show you is a quick sketch that I made in Adobe Illustrator, just showing how I would cluster the bubbles in a different way. All right, so that is the original graphic. Imagine that you have that, but then suddenly you tell readers, hey, if you want to see this as a bar graph, that is how you see proportions. When you cluster the circles that way, suddenly you can see how many countries won medals among the rich ones and how little or how few of the poor countries, those are the poor countries, how few of them won medals. When you reorganize the data that way, it's much clearer for the reader. So you have to think about what tasks you want to facilitate when you are creating a visualization. A visualization is not just a fun presentation of data. A visualization is a tool for extracting meaning from the data. And only after it is a tool for presenting information, it can become a piece of fine art or a fun object or something that, expresses your aesthetic preferences. Only after that. The beauty of a graphic is important, but the functionality of a graphic, respecting the purpose of the graphic, is even more important. At the same time, complementing what I'm saying over here, we should think about copy. We should think about the interaction between text and visuals. That is also something that we visualization designers forget sometimes. By the way, let me remind you what I said before. I have a huge admiration for the Washington Post infographics department. I also admire the person that I'm going to talk about in a minute. His name is Eric Fisher, and a while ago he created a beautiful, beautiful map of languages that are used on Twitter. It's an amazing piece of visualization. I saw it, and actually I wanted to print another t-shirt with that and wear it to classes as a statement. But when you take a look at it, think about, what is this graphic for? What is this graphic supposed to show you? Because that is what your readers will try to do, what your readers will try to see. What the graphic is presenting is basically hundreds of thousands of data points representing languages used on Twitter, and it looks extremely beautiful. It seduces you, it brings you to the information, it grabs your attention, but then read the graphic. A visualization is not something intended to be seen. It's something intended to be read. And if you read the graphic, you will probably do what I did, which is to see that people in Spain tweet in Spanish, and people in France tweet in French, and people in Germany tweet in German. In what sense is that particularly interesting? I already know that. All right? I already know that. The graphic is basically showing me something that I already know, because I know what languages are used in those countries. It's basically representing population. What is this graphic? How could we improve this graphic? It's not just by changing the graphic form. The graphic form is beautiful enough, and it's successful enough. It is wonderful. But what this graphic is missing, in my opinion, is annotation, highlighting the exceptions, the interesting stories in the data. What are those interesting stories? I'm going to show you just one example. A question that I asked myself: who are those people there in the middle of France who are not tweeting in French? Who are those people? That's the story. That's the journalistic part of the story, of the visualization. That graphic is missing what the New York Times graphics people call the annotation layer. After you create your visualization, you should actively highlight the interesting data points and tell something about them. Who are those people? Tell me more about them. Let me click on that area and learn more about those people. Or if your graphic is static, put a number over here and write something about those people down there. In that way, you will put also information into some sort of context, in context somehow. Let me show you an example of a very simple graphic that does this very, very well. It's a graphic by the New York Times. We all admire the New York Times. They get things wrong sometimes also, but in this case they got things very, very, very right, in my opinion. And as you will see, it's not an extremely complex visualization, all right? It's just a simple scatter plot. A scatter plot that shows you the relationship that exists, or the inverse correlation between number of cases, or number of breast cancer cases detected on each one of those countries, and the mortality rate detected also in each one of those countries. And you will see that the relationship is completely inverse. The more cases are detected, the lower the mortality. And the fewer cases are detected, that is the horizontal scale, the higher the number of cases, the number of deaths due to breast cancer. This is very straightforward. It's interactive. You can navigate the graphic, etc., etc. But the interesting thing of the graphic is how they annotate it, the interesting stories in the data. Because you can see that there is also a next button over here that you can click on, and then the graphic will highlight part of the story, the poor countries, and they will tell you something about those countries. There is some text in there involved, there is some copy, there is some interaction between words and visuals. That is the key thing. Another example, you click on next and they highlight the countries in the middle of the distribution. You click on next and they talk about rich countries, and then you click on next and they tell you something about the richest countries in that distribution, in that data set. That's annotation, that's narrative, that's storytelling also. We should be paying attention at all those devices, at all those techniques. At the same time, we should not forget also that you can and you should represent your data more than once, because you are going to create interactive data visualizations. And what I see among many data journalists and data visualization designers is that they just represent their data once. Okay, tons of bubbles everywhere, and that's it. And then, figure it out. Well, in many cases, you can represent your data by means of different graphic forms. A map, a chart, a line chart, a bar graph, etc. Because each one of those graphics is going to let readers see something different in the data. Let me show you just a couple of examples of that. First of all, a very old, or quite old, visualization again by the New York Times, which got things right, in my opinion. It's a graphic that shows you how Americans spend their time every day, what Americans do throughout the day. And as you can see, it's a stacked line chart in which you can see this adds up to 100%. And as you can see, well, first of all, obviously during the night, Americans are not working, but then working begins to be something really important in their lives throughout the day, and the night comes again and work starts going down. This is sleep, so you can see that here. Most Americans are sleeping, but then suddenly throughout the day, there are only around 5% of Americans who are sleeping. Now, what you can see in this graphic form, or through this graphic form, is how everything adds up to 100%. But what about if you are interested in seeing how just one of these numbers is changing throughout the day? You cannot really see that, just because the baseline of each one of those segments of the graphic is shifting, is changing according to how wide the other segments of the graphic are. So you cannot clearly estimate how each one of those portions is changing. But this comes the genius part of this graphic. If you click on any of these parts of the graphic, that part of the graphic will drop down to the baseline, so you can clearly see how that thing changes throughout the day. Two different graphic forms: a stacked line chart, regular line chart. Each one of them lets you see something different in the data. Another example, very quickly, and I'm getting to the end of the presentation. This graphic over here is a graphic that I made with my team at Época magazine in Brazil a while ago when I was still working in Brazil. It shows you population, how population has changed all over the world. And the first thing that you will see is just a bunch of bubbles, all right? Bunch of bubble map over here, and the bubbles are obviously proportional to population. There is a slider over here, which you can navigate to see how population changes in all those countries, up to the present, and then projections for the future, right? Now, what can you do with this map? What is this map useful for? Letting you see the overall pattern, the overall distribution of population. But you cannot make accurate comparisons, you cannot rank the countries, you cannot see the specifics in the data. You cannot do that on a map. A map just lets you see the overall picture, which is great. It's a great entry point to any visualization. But after that, you should give me the opportunity to explore the data in different forms. For instance, let me rank the countries. So you can click on ranking, and that will show you the ranking of all countries in the world, all right? You can filter by continent, etc. There is also a slider over here that you can push back to see the ranking throughout the years. Two graphic forms here. Bubble map for the overall picture, ranking to let you rank these states. But what about if you want to see how things change in your own country, just in your own country? You cannot really do that in the map or on the map. It's really difficult. Even if you push the slider back, over here, it's really difficult to estimate how much each one of these bubbles is changing. So what we decided was to represent the same data a third time through a line graph. If you click on any country over here, I'm just going to click on Argentina, that will give you the change in Argentina, just in Argentina. So it's 3 graphic forms representing exactly the same data. You begin with the data set, but then you allow me to get into the data set or explore the data set through different graphic forms. This is a strategy that I do recommend you use in your work these days. Try to think about the different purposes that your visualization can have, and don't stick just to one graphic form. Usually representing your data more than once is the right approach. And obviously let readers access the entire data set. Let readers download the entire data set. And my final recommendation: focus on what matters. This is actually a little bit redundant because you are already doing that. I heard about the projects that you're working on, and you're all working on things that matter. Murders in Mexico or water problems in Brazil, etc., etc. Those are projects that, in my opinion, matter. They are relevant to citizens. Unfortunately, I see many, not unfortunately, but I would say that many visualization designers tend to spend their time, a lot of their time, with visualizations that are a little bit trivial. And I am not saying that we should not do those things. Those are fun, those are great, etc. But perhaps instead of spending 50% of your time with visualizations about beers in the United States, you can spend 10% of your time on that and then devote 90% of your time to talk about inequality, poverty, healthcare, access to water, I don't know, things that matter. I'm going to show you a few examples of graphics that I do believe that do a great job at the technical level, but then in terms of how relevant they are, well, I don't know if they are that relevant. First of all, this beautiful visualization of city bike rides in New York City. It's an amazing visualization. And as you can see, well, I'm going to just click here to show you the video, because it's a video visualization. You will see how many bike rides happened in New York City throughout the day, and I was completely amazed. I said, well, this is amazing from a technical standpoint. But then, obviously, I did the same thing that I did with Eric Fisher's Twitter Languages graphic before, which is to ask myself, what in the hell seeing here? I'm not seeing anything. I'm just seeing tons of bubbles bouncing around. I'm not getting any information over here. It's fun, but it's difficult to decode. That is the first thing. And then I ask myself, is the topic that relevant? I don't know. If you live in New York City, perhaps this is extremely relevant. But I don't know. Perhaps there are other topics that we could be focusing on a little bit more. By the way, I am not guiltless in this sense. Every semester, I work with students here at UM, obviously, but also with students in Spain. With projects, etc. They send me their ideas for their visualization projects, and I give them advice on how they can improve their projects. So I'm going to show you a project that a student of mine in Spain did a while ago, visualizing something very, very particular. And I gave the okay to this project, because at first I thought that it was amazing. It's a project called Visualizing Buffy, okay? Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What this student did, see how amazing this is. What this student did was basically to time how much time characters in Buffy the Vampire Slayer series spend on screen on every single episode. Okay, on every single episode. He get a chronometer, and he basically calculated how much time each character spends on screen on every chapter, on every episode of the show. You click on that and you will get a visualization of how each one of those characters, when each one of those characters show, when they show. You can filter here and see when Angel is on screen. Don't ask me a lot about this series. I love Game of Thrones, but I have never watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I heard that it is great. So you can add more, you can get rid of some, etc. And take a look at what he did. Then you can click, there are some level of depths here. If you click on any episode, that will give you a timeline of that episode to show you when each character was on screen. Okay, so as you can see, it shows you that Buffy spent a lot of time on screen, but then the master, whoever that person is, only shows at the end of the episode. Okay, and the genius touch in this project, I believe, is that you can see your graphic as an extended timeline or as a compact timeline, which is basically a bar graph. So you can compare how much time or how many minutes each one of those characters spent on the screen. This is an amazing visualization creating with JavaScript, with D3 actually, D3. And actually I was actually a little bit embarrassed because this student learned how to use D3 before than I did. All right, so that was quite embarrassing. But think about the topic. He spent like 3 or 4 months working on these. It satisfies the needs of Buffy's, fans, but, I believe that this student could have done something different and much more worthwhile using exactly this technology, exactly the same technology. And again, I'm not saying that we should not be focusing on these kinds of things. These kinds of projects are fun, they will bring attention to your work, etc., but perhaps they are not that important. Let's reduce the amount of time that we use in these kinds of things. Let's increase the amount of time that we use to create things like that, which is an amazing and very simple data visualization made by the Wall Street Journal a while ago that lets you explore healthcare options in America. It's a very simple and easy to use visualization in which you can basically search for your address or your zip code. Okay, I don't live in Alabama. I live in Miami, obviously. So I can put here my zip code, I believe, and I can search. That's Miami-Dade, obviously. So it will show me how Miami-Dade compares in terms of healthcare options with other states, and then what options you have, what plans are offered in the area where I live, how much they cost, what the deductible is. All these terms will mean nothing if you're not from the US. I'm European, by the way, so they didn't mean anything to me a while ago. If you're planning to move to the US soon, those mean a lot. Those terms mean a lot. So pay attention to those. But the interesting thing is how well and how easily you can navigate the data. This is relevant and this is useful. We should think about how useful our tools are. And finally, my last point, which is related to all this. A while ago, I watched a lecture by a designer called Mike Montero, who works in San Francisco. And he gave a lecture that was titled, How Designers Destroyed the World, which is a very catchy headline or a very catchy title, in my opinion. He was basing his opinions on a book that is called Design for the Real World. The point that Mike was trying to make is that before you care about your art, before you care about how good you are at using Python or R or D3, etc., and this is a point that Miguel made yesterday, forget about the tools for a minute and how proficient you are or how knowledgeable you are at using databases and all that stuff. Focus on the story. Focus on the story. All right, that's what really matters. Focus on what matters. And after watching Mike's presentation, I actually wrote a blog post in which I wrote, our first responsibility as journalists and as designers is towards the planet, towards humankind, to citizens. And only after that, only after we create tools, is our responsibility towards our artsy inner world or towards our client. Our main goal, in my opinion, should be creator of devices that make this planet, that make this place a better place. Before we can even think about becoming fine artists. I do believe that many visualization designers still think too much as fine artists rather than thinking about themselves as engineers of information. That's what we are. We are engineers. We create devices. We shape information in a way that is meaningful, that is relevant, and that is useful. And with that, I get to the end of my talk. Thank you. Sorry, I speak like a machine gun. I didn't offer any opportunity to ask questions. So, yeah.
The argument you made at the end.
The argument that I made. I'm going to repeat the question.
It's a very common argument in the startup scene as well. And
Yeah.
it's whether there is use in creating a startup that's just there and doing a little bit of something, or whether we should actually focus on the real problems.
The real problem.
And
He's saying that basically, just for the translators.
Go
ahead.
So one of the things I always think about this is there is actually value in doing things just for fun. There is
value. He's basically making the case for things that are just fun. Yeah.
And doing things because they're beautiful, showing something and creating art.
Mm-hmm.
So this would basically discredit every artist out there, because an artist rarely does things that matter, except you're Trevor Palin. So I think it's a very important argument. I think we should think of our world, but I think we should never neglect that there is a very important component, and there's very important functions to creating things for fun and creating things that are beautiful, and sort of taking this as part of our world as well.
I completely agree. He's basically saying that we should all... Did you get that? Did you translate what he says? Oh, more or less. He was basically making the case for also paying attention at things that are created just for the sake of creating art, or things that are beautiful, or things that are fun. Okay, because they are also extremely important. Remember that case that I try to be very nuanced in my opinion. I am not saying that they are not, that they don't have value. They do have value. Actually, if you pay attention at one example that I showed before, by Accurate, okay, the graphic that I showed before, that is an extremely difficult to read graphic, but it brings attention to the topic. It is only that after bringing attention to the topic, it fails to deliver. That is the problem that I see. We should care about the beauty of the visualization, because that will attract your attention to a relevant topic, but we should also pay attention at the purpose of the visualization. And at the same time, I also mentioned that I see value in making that thing, for instance. I see value in that, right? It's fun, it's great, it brought a lot of attention to this student work, a lot of attention. The point that I was trying to make is that I do believe, and I could, gather evidence to support that idea. I do believe, and I believe it because I know a lot of people in visualization, that too many visualization designers spend too much time on this kind of thing, rather than spending much more time on this kind of thing. Well, the case that I'm trying to make is, try to think a little bit less about Buffy, try to think a little bit more about healthcare. It's only that. Don't forget about Buffy, but don't forget that healthcare matters more than Buffy. Well, at least if you are, if you're healthy, perhaps not, but, I do believe that it matters more. So there is value in that. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't have value. Yeah?
At the beginning of this talk, you said that, you showed the big book, right? And
Yes.
graphs, saying that context is very important.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we have been talking a lot about people don't wanting to read anymore.
Yes.
And younger generations.
Yeah.
Basically, you have to provide very little.
Very little, information.
Have you thought about that in
Yes.
ways?
Yeah, a lot. So he's saying that there is this, I would call that a myth, by the way. A myth.
Okay.
The myth that today people don't read anymore. Okay? The myth that young people don't read anymore, that people are only interested in getting the headline or just the main point of the story and move on. There is some true in that, for instance, but it all depends on who the reader is. For instance, I couldn't care less about sports. If you show me a sports story, I will probably read the headline, get just the basic spirit of the information and move on. But if I do care about sports, as I care about politics and healthcare and inequalities, etc., I will read your story. And that is as true with me as it is true with my students. If they care about the topic, they will read the story. Now, how can you... It is also true that people don't have a lot of time to take care about all the things that we care about, or paying attention to all the things that we present. But there are things that you can do to address that problem. We in journalists have used the inverted pyramid for many, many years. That could be somehow translated in visualization. So in visualization, first of all, give me the main data points. Right? Then give me the averages, the deviations, the exceptions of the data, write a good headline about that, and first of all, show me just the map, okay? As I mentioned before, just that. That is the entry point. If I only see that, I will more or less get the story, more or less. I will not be able to go deeper into the story if I don't spend time with the visualization, but I will get more or less what the story means. If after that I am interested in the topic, I will navigate the graphic. So one of the things that we need to think about, in my opinion also, and it was implicit in the talk, but it was not explicit, is that in visualization, it is hardly a good idea to present all data at once. Because if you present everything at once, you will scare a lot of people away. Because the visualization will look very busy and very cluttered, etc. Layer the information and sequence the information. Combining sequencing and layering is usually the best strategy. Think about what the New York Times did over here. They are layering the information because you can hover over each one of those points and see the details. And they are also sequencing the information. You can navigate the information in a narrative form, step by step. Absorbing the information and digesting the information little by little. Yeah, go ahead. You were about to say something? Okay, more questions.
Yes, so we're getting at people interested in visualization. A lot of people, especially for those who are younger demographic, are going to be doing a lot of mobile.
A lot of mobile, yes.
And something like this.
Doesn't translate well. Yeah. So she's saying that a mobile poses a challenge to data visualization, which is that when you are seeing things on a large screen, you can see the entire complexity, you can navigate the data, etc. When you present the same thing in a mobile platform, all right, an iPhone, etc., you cannot present that complexity, everything at once. Well, that actually, I'm thinking about that myself these days, how to address that problem, and I have not reached any conclusion yet about it, but I believe that the answer to that challenge is related to what I have just said. Sequence and layer the information. Again, what mobile forces you to do is to present less information at once, all right? So you present just a little of information at first, the most important piece of information, and then you let readers navigate the data in a sequential format or in a scroll format, etc. Those are the kinds of things that we should be, that we need to think about. But it's a huge challenge, obviously. We have another question over there.
Yes, actually two questions.
Okay.
Going back to the Washington Post Olympics graphic.
Yes.
Yes, all of the little marching dots were fun, but that graphic was hard to read. Why not just go with the little dots on the bar chart?
Because they are not fun. I mean, I do believe, oh, sorry, are you going to finish your question? Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's the first question.
Okay, let me answer that first, and then you can go to the second. I do believe that there is value in presenting things in an unusual way, okay? This grabbed my attention. I said before, I am not interested at all about in sports, at all. I don't care about that. I don't care about who wins medals, but I read the graphic. Why? Because it has an unusual shape. It's fun, it's beautiful, etc. But then it has the same problem as Accurate's graphic before. It grabbed my attention, but then it failed to deliver. At the same time, if they had presented the information just like this, perhaps I would not have read the graphic. Okay? Perhaps. That is why I believe that there is some value in having some fun with the data a little bit at first. Not that much, not going beyond that first step. Just a little touch of sophistication, a little touch of beauty, a little touch that makes your graphic a little bit different than what you see in the market. You see bar graphs everywhere. And I love bar graphs, by the way. It's one of my favorite graphic forms. But I recognize that they are everywhere. They are very common.
Could you tell us what you thought of the Times snowfall project?
What I think about snowfall, all right, remember snowfall, the project by the New York Times a while ago. Let me show you the snowfall. That has actually become a verb, snowfalling stories. Actually, I get the Weather Channel. All right, my long answer to that question, if you search for Snowfall, the Functional Art, which is my website, I wrote about that exactly. Oh, actually, I got the Jon Snow, the movie thing. Oh, here it is, the snowfallization of news. That is an article that I wrote a while ago about what I think about snowfall. I do believe that there is a lot of value on what the New York Times tried to do over here. I didn't read the story because I couldn't care less about what the story is about. It bored me. I get bored as hell with the story. No matter how well written it was, etc., I couldn't care about the story. If I care about the story, great. This is a great platform. I do believe that it's too long, too complex, too everything. It has too many elements. It takes too long to read. But it is a wonderful example. Why? Because they were trying to push the boundaries a little bit in terms of what we can do with multimedia journalism. So it's a fail. Is it a failed project? In part, it is, but it is also a triumph of multimedia journalism, in my opinion, just because it's showing one of the possible ways in which we could go in the future. And actually, in that same article, I also write about a project by The Guardian US called NSA Files Decoded, which takes the snowfall platform or the snowfall pattern or template, and it applies it a little bit better. Obviously, I care more about that story than I care about the snowfall story. That's why I read the other one. But basically, this article is a defense of snowfall, even if I criticize it. Yeah, Miguel.
About charts and data visualization, have you come to define a way of, because I've seen that there's data visualization there to tell a story, so you outline or define how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
For that, and there are others that are for letting the user to find information from the general perspective or from a way of, because I've seen that there's data visualization there to tell a story, so you outline or define how you're going to do it for that, and there are others that are for letting the user to find information from the general perspective or from the like specific to the broader. Have you do you have kind of like a pointer of like the things that you've defined there?
Yeah, I do. Have at least two different dimensions or two different levels. One of them, I call them the presentation layer. This is actually is one of the main points that I try to make in my book and in all my classes. All visualizations have a presentation layer. The presentation layer is the introduction to the graphic, the annotation layer in which you highlight the main data points, the narrative that you make to let readers understand the data a little bit better. That is the narrative or the storytelling or the presentation side of the graphic. At the same time, you have the exploratory or the exploration side of the visualization, in which you present all data to readers and you let readers explore those data. The thing is that when you create a visualization, you need to balance out those two things. And you have to think about, and there are not clear-cut rules on how to do this. It's something that in which your editorial voice comes in. You have to decide, what is it more important, telling the story or presenting the entire data set? Or can I present the main points in the story and then let the readers explore the data? Those are the kinds of things that you need to balance out. In my opinion, you can do both in interactive visualizations. You can create something that, and again, I'm going to go to the point of Eric Fisher's map of Twitter languages. This is a good example. This is the entry point. Okay, if we highlight the main data points in there, and we say, well, these are the exceptions, these are the interesting stories. That is the presentation layer of the graphic. And then after I see the presentation layer of the graphic, I click on next, or I click on a different tab, and then you let me explore the data at will. I do believe that some people who come from print backgrounds, okay, infographics designers who come from print backgrounds, focus too much on the presentation layer, and they tend to oversimplify. And then visualization designers who come from a technical background, engineers, computer science people, tend to focus too much on the exploration side. They need to work together, because the traditional infographic designer will come up with the idea for the presentation layer, the technical guy or the technical girl will come up with the exploration layer of the graphic. You need to have both. And the example that I usually give to illustrate that idea, I could talk about for hours about this idea. The example that I usually point out to explain the two layers is the work of Hans Rosling. Okay? Rosling, probably 80 or 90% of you have heard about Hans Rosling. If you haven't, visit his website, which is gapminder.org. Rosling actually is someone who I interviewed for my book, because I was really interested on how he presents data. Because he has, in all the graphics that he has a presentation layer. The presentation layer is himself in front of the screen presenting data. Hey, take a look at China. Hey, take a look at that. Hey, take a look at how interesting that is. That is the presentation layer. But after you see the presentation layer, he lets you access the entire data set. All right, you can go online, you can go to his website. This is the data part, the Gapminder World. You click on Gapminder World, and you can access the tool. You can access to the tool that he uses in his presentations. So you get the main data points thanks to the presentation layer, him presenting, and then you get the exploration layer of the visualization by going to the interactive visualization over here. This is how you balance out those things. By the way, I do believe that there is a lot of value on talking yourself, presenting data like that. All right, showing yourself in front of the screen, showing the data like that. That's what he does. It's a very effective way of presenting information. Another question.
Alberto, es para regresar a lo que acabas de decir, de
móviles, cada
Ujú,
vez más.
ujú.
La gran mayoría de los gráficos que hemos visto son casi imposibles o dificilísimos
De transfer.
poner en un teléfono. No imagino Snowfall en un teléfono y ya es complicado de un texto. Lo que voy es, uno como periodista entonces, dado que la lectura y los hábitos de lectura van para un lado, hacia dónde uno debería ir a la hora de conceptualizar los trabajos, este tipo de trabajos, pensando en que todo es responsive, en que todo, o sea, esa es una de las cosas que a mí me...
Okay, so the question is, again, going back to the question before about the challenges that mobile platforms pose to designers. How can we create things that can be viewed on a computer screen, on a television, on a mobile phone, or on a tablet computer? How can we do that? I'm not an expert in that, but what I can say is that if you want, responsive design obviously is one of the answers, okay? It's only that it is not enough, because responsive design works very well for websites, but it doesn't work that well for data visualizations. I do believe, though, that I'm going to translate a strategy that I tried to explain when I worked at in El Mundo in Spain a while ago. When I worked in El Mundo, back in between 2000 and 2005, the way graphics were produced for the web platform, at that point we only had two platforms, print and web. And the way that visualizations and infographics were created at that time is that the print infographic people created the print visualization, they finished it up, it got published, and then they passed the PDF to the web designers, and they told them, figure it out, transform it into an interactive graphic. That was impossible to do. So what the change that we made at that point was to think about the two platforms simultaneously from the very beginning. Think about the strengths and weaknesses of both platforms, print and online, all right, at that point, and try to think about what can you present in those platforms. I think that is a very simple and applicable idea that we can apply today to mobile and to web, etc. You will not be able to present something like that on a cell phone. Fine, don't present it. Just present the piece of information that you believe that is more relevant. Or organize the graphic in a different way, sequence it more, split it up or chunk it more into different steps. So, but the thing is that you cannot wait until the visualization is done to do that. You have to do the planning from the very beginning. You have to have people in your team who can do work for different platforms. Okay, so the idea still applies. Yes?
Teniendo en cuenta que todas las infografías que has mostrado y que los receptores del mensaje ahora quieren leer cada vez menos, ¿crees que los pictogramas, o sea, utilizar pictogramas en el desarrollo de infografías pueden servir de ayuda o podrían ser considerados como un distractor?
Okay, so again, we go back to the question of people reading less today than they used to. And the question is if including some pictorial elements in graphics, such as pictograms, icons, illustrations, can enhance the reading or the interest of the graphic, or they can basically interfere with the understanding of the graphic. Well, two answers to that. First of all, I don't think that people are reading less today than they used to. I still have to see evidence to prove that. I don't believe so. They may read in a different way, or they may consume information in a different way, but I don't believe that people read less today. I remember when I was in college, ages ago, my colleagues didn't read at all. They didn't read books, and we didn't have tablet computers, and we didn't have cell phones, and they didn't read books anyway. What they did, they went to the bar to talk with their friends, etc., etc. I was a bookworm. I'm still a bookworm, so I prefer to read. But reading, I don't think that reading has changed that much throughout the years. It may have changed, the platforms. The platforms may have changed, but not the amount of reading that we do, or the amount of information that we consume. That is part of my answer. The second thing is if using pictograms or icons or illustrations can interfere or can enhance in visualizations. It depends on how you do it, and it depends on your audience. That is the thing that I wanted to point out. If you are going to do a graphic for kids, you could do something like that. I'm fine with that. But if you're going to create the same graphic for adults, this is not very appropriate. I actually feel insulted by the how shallow this thing is. I want to know more. The designer here is wasting a lot of space with cute illustrations rather than using that space to tell a better story. So I do believe that graphics here, pictorial elements, illustrations are interfering
with your capacity of telling a good story. But if you're going to do the same graphic for kids, obviously you need to simplify. So you have to think about the audience that you are talking to. And then the other thing is, am I against using pictorial elements in graphics? Not necessarily. Even if you're going to create, it all depends on where you put the illustration. If you put a little, for example, you do this for adults and you show line charts and bar graphs and scatter plots and stuff, and then you put a little pictogram here on the corner of a person dressed in a particular way just to illustrate what the topic of the graphic is, the visualization, the illustration there is not interfering with the information. Fine, just include it. It's not interfering with information. It is different when the illustration is taking away space that you should be using to tell a better story. Or when somehow you integrate the illustration with the graphics, and by doing that, you distort the graphic, which is something that happens sometimes, by creating 3D effects in visualizations and stuff, which are usually work really, really bad. So those are the kinds of things that we should consider. Is the illustration interfering with the information? That is the question that you need to answer. Yes?
So you brought up an example from Vox meetings.
Yeah.
The healthcare.
Yeah.
And you said it was misleading because...
I believe that it is.
It didn't address all of it. How do you address the balance between comprehension of the graph and being true to the data?
First of all, you do this. Presenting absolute numbers is usually extremely dangerous. Okay? You need to control for population, control for income, control for. You need to normalize your data. That is the first thing. Isn't there value in presenting absolute values? No, you can show the absolute values if you want to, but what really matters is these. All right? Actually, if you go to the Vox story that I'm highlighting here, I actually recreated several of their bar graphs, and they don't look that dramatic now. Right? The US is more expensive than other countries, obviously, but when you show the numbers as a percent of income or GDP per capita in those countries, the image is not that striking. That is the first step. And second of all, you cannot hide that from me. This, what I mentioned before. If you hide this from your readers, if you don't express your own doubts about the data, the nuances that you see in the data, then you are in trouble. You need to show me that. You need to tell me, well, this comparison may not be that appropriate just because our source is getting 100 million data points here and just a few data points over here. That is not a fair comparison. Can you use the source? Well, first of all, let me tell you in advance. I would not publish this story. That is the first thing. The story is dead, in my opinion. This is an example of story that would need a lot of work before it gets published. But even if you want to publish this story, you need to do more work on that, and you need to reveal all those problems with the data, even if you want to use it. How do you do that? I mean, it doesn't matter. You can put a note somewhere or an explanation, a footnote, I don't know, but you need to show me that. It needs to be explicit there. Hey, this is what is going on, but, the story may be much more complicated than it seems. That's what I think. We need to, sorry about that, I will be around until, well, it's almost noon, sorry about that. I will be around probably until 12:30 or something like that. So if you need to answer any other question, you can ask me, or you can shoot me an email, right? My website is not showing over here, it's thefunctionalart.com. Email address is alberto.cairo@gmail.com. So if you have any question in the future, just let me know. And again, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We could stay here ages talking with Alberto, but we have little time. May I ask you?
You bored?